Thanks so much, Dave. That's great. Thank you both, Aletta and Dave, for sharing your research findings with us. I know everyone's anxious to get some coffee, but before we do, we just wanted to allow for a 20-minute Q&A session. So I invite Giulia Montici, who is the Impact Initiative's country coordinator. She was overseeing both of those researches, and so she will be moderating the Q&A. Apologies for bringing the laptop. As you know, we're submitting the questions through an online system, and so many have been coming in from the chat box as well as from the people in the room. That's really great. So she just needs her laptop to select those questions and be able to answer them. Aletta, would you mind joining in the room? There you go.
Thanks so much, Marieke, and thanks, Aletta and Dave, for the amazing presentation. And also, I'm grateful to the team to working really hard in also COVID time to implement those interesting research. So now we have 20 minutes to answer some of your questions. We have questions coming from the people attending in person, question coming from people attending online. So thanks a lot for your engagement. Also, if you want to jump in at some point, it's also welcome. We most likely won't have the time to answer all your questions. Sorry. So we will have a selection of them, and don't worry, because if some questions remain unanswered, then Aletta and Dave will get back to you and via mail to answer all outstanding questions. So let's move on. I will use my laptop to just check the different questions coming in. So maybe the first question, I will direct this one to Aletta. It's coming from someone attending in person who didn't wrote down his name, so I don't know who is the person posing the question, but the question is related to the mechanism. So it's not clear what are the differences between prepaid cards and bank cards. So over to you, Aletta.
Is it on? Hello. Okay. So yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And there was a lot of confusion and exchanging of different definitions, I think. And still, I think it's for someone who's not maybe an expert in financial mechanisms, it's still difficult to understand. So the way that I interpret it, the way that I interpret the different definitions is that a bank card is always linked to an account, whereas a prepaid card is not necessarily linked to a bank account and functions more like an e-voucher or a smart card. And I realized that I was still using some jargon there, so if you're still confused, we also both included definitions, right, in our reports. I think in the ULearn report, it's somewhere in the back, like page 30, 33, 34, somewhere. In the section on prepaid and smart cards, you can see a definition of the mechanism, whereas I believe in Dave's report, page 16. Wow, okay. Impressive. Okay. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Aletta. So again, a question for Aletta. I think a question for Dave just coming since he was the last presenter. This is coming from, again, someone in person, Alex. I don't know the organization, but it's a question about how we measure preferences. So what was a question that we posed respondent to measure preferences, and then if the question was based on ranking, and again, if there was another option, then we also analyze somehow. If we included another option across the different available mechanism.
Good question. So the specific phrasing, I believe, of the question was, we asked if you were to receive financial humanitarian assistance in the future, which mechanism would you prefer? And we did also include in kind, so actually we didn't just ask about financial mechanisms, and that is why you see in kind in the rankings. But unfortunately, we didn't include an other option, so we just assumed that we had exhausted the options, which perhaps maybe was a wrong assumption. That was it.
Again, on preferences is quite a hot topic. So this is a question coming from Rose from Trickle Up. So the question is about the effects of preferences on household dynamics. So there was any any question in relation to how preferences for cash transfer modalities relate to household dynamics?
Really, really interesting question. There is definitely some factors there, particularly in the qualitative data, and particularly looking at the community leaders, so the KIIs we did with community leaders. They were less likely to trust beneficiaries with financial assistance and rather opted for in-kind assistance because they were afraid of exactly such dynamics. Whereas the beneficiaries themselves or the interviewees themselves, the refugees and the host community members, they themselves opted for financial assistance over in kind and were not so worried about these issues. However, yes, I can say that there were some factors, and I'm sure I can dig out the specifics for you. They were mentioned as barriers, but just not as sort of the top few barriers. And yeah, if you want to send me an email, I'll send you the specific percentages as well.
So this question pretty much relates also on gender dynamics. So we have a question coming from Lisa, USAID online participant, about disaggregated gender data on preferences. So if we have it, if we have this kind of disaggregation.
Good question again. Unfortunately, if we had, we thought about representative sampling in terms of gender, but unfortunately, sampling strategy is a bit too much right now to explain, but basically it would have doubled our sample size if we had sampled representatively for both genders. So unfortunately, we don't have representative data for that. We do, of course, have data that we can disaggregate for gender as well as qualitative data. It's just not representative. So yeah, unfortunately, we haven't included it in the report as sort of handfast results. But yeah, again, if you are wanting to discuss further, let's please schedule a meeting and we can discuss.
Yeah, maybe just to add on this, if we look at data at national level, then yes, we have representativeness, but we don't have it at settlement level. So if we want to check differences on gender at settlement level, then it's hard, but then when we look at aggregation, yes, we can have representative data. So now to balance a bit, I will ask some question to Dave. The question is about transaction cost. So it's it's a question from Solomon online, Muguluzi Solomon, and it's about transaction costs for mobile money versus agent banking. And the question is about if there might be a perception of the cost that is also influencing how those costs are perceived. So it's saying, for example, if we withdraw 10,000 shillings from Equity Bank, it costs 600 compared to 1,175 by MTN of Airtel. So is there also a perception of the cost, or is this real cost differences?
Yeah, thanks, Solomon, for that question. We did have information from the interviews with Refugee Welfare Council members that they were reporting that there's a lot of confusion, a general confusion about the fees and the requirements that banking institutions in particular maintain. For example, some banks might have the requirement that you leave a certain amount, like 20,000 shilling, into your bank account to remain active. Which means that if a beneficiary has 50 or 60,000 shilling in there, he wants to withdraw it, he can only withdraw 40,000. And beneficiary representatives were saying that this is causing confusion, also sometimes anger for people because they don't understand. So I think there's a room there for improved communication from the banks to the population. Another related issue with that is also the fees that are charged in some cases a bank might charge a monthly fee separate of withdrawing or making deposits. It is a fee to maintain bank accounts. And again, this is not well understood, I think, by a lot of populations. This is what the representatives told us. So I think there's room there for improved communication, and it's very important.
Okay, so this is, can be seen as a sort of barrier, the the withdrawing cost. So let's move also to another question in relation to barriers. And this is posed by Andrew from PHP, an in-person attendance, and is directed to Aletta. So the question is about poor connectivity as a barrier. Is not emerging for mobile money, smart cards, and bank transfer. So is this really a barrier or is not? Poor connectivity in settlements.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Very interesting, actually, from the beneficiary side. We did ask about both mobile connectivity as well as internet connectivity. And we can say that especially internet connectivity is incredibly low. The question was, at your home or in the immediate surroundings, are you able to connect to the internet or to a mobile network? Mobile networks was a little bit higher, but internet connectivity was quite low. However, it did not come up during the barrier. So when we asked what limits your use of certain mechanisms or the access to certain mechanisms, that did not come up. But I do think that perhaps Dave has something to add. Do you want to add?
Well, for the beneficiaries, we don't know, because in our research we didn't directly speak with them. We did qualitative interviews with representatives, but we did speak to the agents, as I mentioned, and from their side, yeah, all of them said we had a specific question in the tool regarding does connectivity ever lead to issues, and there was no one who didn't say that was not an issue, but they of course were approaching it from their area of business and operations, and it was disrupting that. So not thinking so much about access for the clients, perhaps. But yeah.
Okay, so Dave just mentioned that his research wasn't really addressing directly user preferences. There is a question about a bit of clarification on that from David, FCDO, regarding if there were any differences from your findings from user preferences and the ones from Aletta, and how maybe the different methodology used.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we were also anxiously, of course, looking at this. The timeline of our two assessments was slightly different. We had a limited preferences was one smaller part of our overall assessment, and we decided to have a qualitative approach to that. So doing interviews. Initially, we had the similarity was, okay, direct cash and mobile money seemed to be the two most preferred mechanisms. We could not really see nuance there. That was meaning that beneficiary representatives that we interviewed in Lobule were saying very similar things to those in Nachivale, actually. What was very nice about the ULearn deep dive, of course, was that they were getting very granular representative results at the actual community level. So we were anxiously awaiting that, and then we did see some of these regional differences, some of these differences between settlements, and were able also to explain that. So that was very nice. It was a nice addition.
Thanks, Dave. So another question from anonymous person attending in this room. So it's around safety and security of the agent. So any other effects beyond the fear of fraud on the PSN, possibly in terms of effects on their relationship? So if is a concern also from the FSP point of view regarding safety and security of the agent, not only beneficiaries?
Well, on that topic of scams and fraud, agents were actually also mentioning that they were targeted frequently. And agents themselves are not necessarily enormous experts on these topics. Like they can be very, they're small, medium businesses with one-man shop often, and they can be new to the game, so to speak, as well. And so they would receive phone calls from persons who are impersonating maybe MTN or Airtel head office or something like this. And so they would fall for the same trap sometimes. And then the issue that they were mentioning to us, separate of that, is that just a lot of people receive phishing text style messages where they say, you have won a certain amount, a prize, transfer me 5,000 shilling and you will win your prize. And then they go to these people get very happy, they go to the agent and to expect some sort of assistance. and the agent can actually not do much for them. So that's what they were reporting to us on that topic.
Thanks, Dave. So the following is a bit of an overreaching question, and is asked by Sarah Gilbert, attending online from CRS. So the question is around what is the focus. So our research, we're focusing on the refugee response primarily. We didn't cover Karamoja, but maybe a question to pose to Eunice, if the cash common approach is only directing the refugee response, or also including Karamoja, for example.
So we are limited to look at the refugee response. This is the mandate that we have under the auspices of UNHCR. So sometimes our studies are used beyond the refugee response, but the discussions that we are having are specifically targeted to the refugees.
Thanks, Eunice. I'm told that we have 2 more minutes, so I will just ask maybe 1 or 2 questions. We'll try to be very short in the answer. So this question is from Paul from World Vision. So based on user preferences, it seems that mobile money is standing. However, we don't see potentially an appetite from UN agency to promote mobile money in the settlements. So now that we have this evidence, this will result in an increased promotion of delivery mechanisms that align to user preferences. So I will say this goes maybe to WFP. Stefan, sorry to call you here.
Happy to. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Stefan. I'm head of crisis response for the World Food Programme. It's an excellent question. So we have looked at mobile money from the very beginning that we looked at expanding cash-based transfers and making cash-based transfers digitally exclusive as well to benefit from more financial services for refugees. The problem is the regulatory environment over the past couple of years has been fairly volatile, and I suppose our colleagues from MTN and Airtel would agree with me. We had a tax introduction that came somewhat out of the blue that makes operational planning fairly impossible. We've had massive KYC issues that are not yet fully resolved, but tremendous progress has been made to that end. The ability to validate and to enable refugees to register SIM cards. And then on top, of course, we see the user preferences, and in the spirit of accountability to affected population, is it's extremely valuable research that we definitely will be taken into consideration. So we do have contracts with, in preparation with both mobile network operators in Uganda, MTN and Airtel. I know the same is true for our sister agency, UNHCR. But again, we need to, like, user preferences is one important pillar of a feasibility analysis. There's much more to it. We've seen the issue of liquidity management, for example, where banks seem to have a significant comparative advantage. And when we talk about cash-based assistance of $4 million every month injected into the local economies and directly into the pockets of refugees, those are large volumes where we need to assure liquidity, for example. There's many other considerations that I don't want to go into right now. Happy to do that in the panel later. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. And indeed, the purpose of our research was to cover both. So we look at user preference, but also FSP concern and limitation. So this is really a broad topic, not only focusing on one of the pillar. So the last question to Dave is around the FSP presence in the settlements. So someone is asking, sorry. Okay, so in the different charts that we have on the different settlements here in the room, it's not clear how is the actual distribution of services within the settlements. So during the presentation, this didn't come really clear. So can we add a bit on that?
Yes, it's a very good question. I can imagine the interest in that topic. One of the limitations of this research, in the sense that we had to do we had to switch to remote data collection was that we were not able to travel into a settlement and then take GPS coordinates and do a survey and know exactly, hey, this agent is located there, this banking branch perhaps is located there, which would have been very, very good, I think, but unfortunately it was due to the circumstance. So it's not always clear. What we can say is the most detail that we got is do you have an agent network, and then how big is your agent network, and we have that per FSP, for example. But then how that agent network is distributed within the settlement, we do not have that information captured in our database. We know that especially when it comes to banking institutions, the number of agents in a settlement is quite limited, generally speaking, and most of the settlements have certain, I would say, centers of operations where the central marketplace is, and that's where you'll find those agents, at least from my own personal observations as well. That's what I see. Then mobile network operators, MNO agents, they are a little bit more scattered. But again, the services that they offer, the more remote you are, the smaller the agent is, and usually the services that they offer are limited to deposit, withdrawal, and that's it. So you want to renew your SIM card, you want to open an account in someone else, like that's you would have to travel most likely to do that. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Thanks so much. I think the time is against us, so it's actually done our time. We have still a lot of questions, and please, if you have some that come up later, keep asking, and we will take care to answer after the workshop. Thanks a lot for your engagement. Now I'll hand it over to Marika.